What does a person need in order to truly and fully enjoy the pleasures of life? That's what is covered in the first article of question 141 of the second part of the Summa Theologica. This series of articles have to do with the virtue of temperance. And the very first article, which poses the question whether temperance is a virtue, concerns itself with that question of how do we go about enjoying all the pleasures of life to the fullest extent possible. That's what the virtue of temperance is about, and that's what this question addresses, whether temperance is a virtue. Objection 1, it seems that temperance is not a virtue, for no virtue goes against the inclination of nature, since there is in us a natural aptitude for virtue, as stated in Ethics 2, chapter 1. Now, temperance withdraws us from pleasures to which nature inclines, according to Ethics, Book 2, chapter 3.8. Therefore, temperance is not a virtue. So already from this first objection, we get an idea of what the virtue of temperance is all about. It's seemingly about withdrawing us from pleasures to which nature inclines us. Let's move on to the second objection. Further, virtues are connected with one another, as stated above in a previous question, but some people have temperance without having the other virtues, for we find many who are temperate and yet covetous or timid. Therefore, temperance is not a virtue. And the third, okay, what does that mean? That means that one comes across people who seem to have some virtues but don't have other virtues. And yet, if you remember correctly, in one of the previous episodes, we spoke about all the virtues being formally related. What does that mean? It means that in terms of the effects that they have, they all have the same effect, which is to gear us towards the good. You remember we used that analogy of a sculpture of a bunny, and it's the exact same shape and size, but one is made of plastic, one is made of porcelain, one is made of silver, the other is made of gold. Now, in terms of the effect, in terms of what it looks like a bunny, right? It's all the exact same thing of Bugs Bunny. But then in terms of what it is in itself, in terms of what it is in its species, and that's a term which St. Thomas uses a lot, and it's important to understand that the word special, specific, and species all stem from the same general idea of what a thing is in and of itself. So in terms of the species, those three different sculptures are different, but then in terms of the effects that they have, they all communicate the shape and the form of a bunny. So that's what this objection is saying, that virtues are connected with one another, but some people have temperance without having the other virtues, for we find many who are temperate and yet covetous or timid. Therefore, temperance is not a virtue. So we shall further explain. We shall get to a better definition of temperance, or a wider or a bit larger, deeper definition of temperance shortly. Third objection: further, to every virtue there is a corresponding gift, as appears from what we have said above. But seemingly, no gift corresponds to temperance, since all the gifts have been already ascribed to the other virtues. Therefore, temperance is not a virtue. What is this referring to? Do you remember we were speaking in the previous episode, we spoke about fortitude, and then now we've moved on to temperance. But there's a question right at the end of the articles about fortitude, about the gift of fortitude, where St. Thomas speaks about the relation between the virtue of fortitude and the gift of fortitude. Now, I didn't go into that, but moved straight into temperance. But this is something which St. Thomas, basing himself on the work of church fathers of the church, such as Augustine, align all the gifts of the Holy Spirit, the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit, to the different cardinal virtues. So that's what this is speaking about, that the virtue of temperance does not seem to be aligned to any of the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. On the contrary, Augustine says temperance is the name of a virtue. I answer that. So now this is St. Thomas going into his explanation of whether temperance is a virtue or not. And in this explanation, not only does he give the definition of what temperance is, but he also explains or gives an idea of why this is needed for us to enjoy life to the fullest. Let's go into it. I answer that As stated above, it is essential to virtue to incline man to good. St. Thomas is such a good teacher. He keeps repeating concepts over and over so that they're just drummed into our minds and we remember them. It is essential to virtue to incline man to good. Now, the good of man is to be in accordance with reason, as Dionysius states. Hence, human virtue is that which inclines man to something in accordance with reason. Now, temperance evidently inclines man to this, since its very name implies moderation or temperateness, which reason causes. Therefore, temperance is a virtue. Let's unpack that just a little bit. The word temperance, or the word, what are some words that are related to the word temperance? Temperate, as in climate. So for instance, when you have a temperate climate, that refers to a climate that is kind of like a Mediterranean climate. The extremes are never too extreme. It's never extremely cold and it's never extremely hot, like, in a desert, but it's somewhere in the middle. So temperate means there's like a good mix there of hot and cold. So, and then you have certain fruits growing there, grapes, wine, etc., coming from such places. So that's temperate climate, something that is well mixed and well balanced. Or you have an example of tempered steel. What's tempered steel? Tempered steel is steel where, the iron and the carbon are very well mixed together. You don't have too much of one and too little of the other, but they are perfectly mixed together. And as a result, you get this super, super strong steel. What's another word where you can say a person has lost his temper? What does that mean? It means he has lost the balance of the emotions within him, and as a result, he has gone to one extreme of usually his anger, right? He's lost his temper, he's lost his balance of anger and resentment and fury, and now he's gone to one extreme. And in a weird sense, he's kind of lost his inner strength, kind of lost his inner balance. When a person loses their temper, and like tempered steel, they become distempered or untempered. I don't know if the word untempered exists. Anyway, it's kind of like they lose their strength, they lose their balance. So those are all words which help us to understand this point, where St. Thomas says, temperance evidently inclines man to this, to the good of reason, since its very name implies moderation or temperateness, which reason causes. So it's only through thinking, it's only through the rational mind that a person realizes, okay, I need to maintain a balance here. I need to not go too much in this direction or too much in the other direction. And this is what enables me to remain balanced in any situation. That is the good of reasoning. The good of reason, this balance between different extremes or balance between different components which make up something, including our mood or our personality. What does this have to do with enjoying the pleasures of life? Let's get into it. That's what the replies to the objections go into. Reply to objection 1. You remember objection 1 basically said, listen, temperance is not a virtue because no virtue goes against the inclination of nature, since there is in us a natural aptitude for virtue. We spoke about this some episodes ago, where we said the first precept of the moral law, which is hard-coded into the heart of every human being, is do good and avoid evil. And then we said, this is kind of like good news. It means that our default setting is towards virtue. That's what this point means, that no virtue goes against the inclination of nature, since there is in us a natural aptitude for virtue. So naturally, we are inclined to do what is good. However, temperance withdraws us from pleasures to which nature inclines us. Therefore, it cannot be a virtue. This is St. Thomas's reply to that. Nature inclines everything to whatever is becoming to it. So for instance, human nature, it's becoming to a human being or it's proper to a human being to want to stay alive and to want to keep the species going, the human race going. That is why by nature we are inclined to things such as food and drink and sleep, which keep my body going, keep my body alive, and sex, which keeps the entire human race going. So nature inclines everything to whatever is becoming or proper to it. Wherefore, man naturally desires pleasures that are becoming to him. Since, however, man as such is a rational being, it follows that those pleasures are becoming to man which are in accordance with reason. So that's this point. Okay, it bears repeating in different words. It's very important to, there's a definition of human beings which, people don't speak about, people don't mention. It's just been forgotten, maybe forgotten in the annals of philosophical history. But that definition is a powerful one, and I've not come across a better one. And that is that a human being is a rational animal. The only creature in the universe that is a rational animal. What does that mean? Human beings are weird because, or special, not weird. We have a mixture between a spiritual nature and an animal nature. We're not 100% animals like birds and dogs and camels, but we're not 100% spiritual like angels. We're a mixture of both of these things. We sort of like, we're the bridge linking the spiritual world to the material world. That is the best definition I've ever come across of a human being. In fact, I remember when we were studying this subject many years ago in philosophy. There's a philosophy course I did, and the lecturer, he posed what he used to call this philosophical fantasy. He said, if you go to a planet and you find an alien there, an alien being, and that being has a spiritual soul and a physical body, what is that? And we spoke about it, but then he said, based on the and I've always remembered because this just stood in my mind about what a human being is. Based on the definition of a human being, a rational animal, if that thing has a physical body and it has a spiritual soul, it's a human being. It's actually a human being. And we were speaking about the consequences of that it is therefore subject to the redemption of Jesus Christ, etc., etc. But look, it's all we used to call it philosophical or theological fiction, or theological fiction. But that's the point. A human being is a rational animal. That's what St. Thomas is saying here. Since, however, man as such is a rational being, it follows that those pleasures are becoming to man which are in accordance with reason. From such pleasures, temperance does not withdraw him, but from those which are contrary to reason. He introduces a very important concept here, that there are certain pleasures which human beings experience which are not in accordance with reason. In other words, for every pleasure which we experience, there is usually a reason behind that. And there are certain other pleasures which, when they go against the reason behind that, cease to be virtuous pleasures. And usually that pleasure in itself turns around and just, kicks us in the behind and punishes us. I mean, a typical example, if you've ever had a meal, came across your favorite meal, what you really, really love, and then you overindulged and ate so much of it that you got indigestion or a runny tummy or whatever it was, perfect example. That's an example of how a pleasure, which when it's not in accordance with reason, actually harms our human nature, and as a result of that is vicious, is a vice, a pleasure, and that still, so temperance helps us to avoid those pleasures which are not in accordance with reason. Or another example, if you've ever drank too much, and then you felt sick, your stomach got messed up, you threw up, next day you woke up and you felt like a train had run over you. That's another example of how the virtue of temperance could have, would have, should have enabled us to fully enjoy that drink that we were having or that food that we were having within the limits of reason, so that we can fully enjoy it. And the moment when we go beyond the limits of reason, that pleasure turns around and kicks us in the behind, and we are no longer able to enjoy it. This is why the virtue of temperance, which moderates the enjoyment of pleasures, actually enables us to enjoy those pleasures to the full. Wherefore, it is clear that temperance is not contrary to the inclination of human nature, but is in accord with it. It is, however, contrary to the inclination of the animal nature that is not subject to reason. In other words, our animal nature is the one, it's just like fish in a tank. I don't know if you've ever had fish in a tank, but fish in a tank, doesn't. If you put in too much fish food, they'll just eat and eat and eat and eat and eat until they die. Like they'll eat themselves to death. That's animal nature. It's not tempered by reason. There's no reason that says, okay, stop eating, because in fact, this just reminds me of a time when I went to a marine park in Durban called King Shaka Ushaka Marine World, and one of the guides there told us. I think someone asked about how often they feed the fish there in the aquariums, and they said they always give them a little less than the fish need, so that the fish can always keep swimming about and hunting for food all the time, 24/7. They're always looking for more food. Why? Because if they gave them enough, or gave them a little bit more than enough, the fish would stop swimming about looking for food, and that would actually result in them falling sick. So that's just an example of how animal nature is not in accord with reason. And for a human being who's got that combination of animal nature and spiritual nature, or animal nature and reason, it's very important that we act in accord with reason, because reason, being the more excellent part of ourselves, is the one that has to guide all the lower parts of ourselves. Reply to objection 2. The temperance which fulfills the conditions of perfect virtue is not without prudence. Okay, let's go back. What did objection 2 said? Objection 2 said, listen, all the virtues are connected. All the virtues are supposed to direct us towards good. However, we do come across people who seem to have temperance, but they don't have the other virtues. So what's up with that? That means temperance cannot be a virtue then, because how can you have one virtue and not the other? So this is his reply to that objection. The temperance which fulfills the conditions of perfect virtue is not without prudence, while this is lacking to all who are in sin. What is prudence? So prudence is right reason, or in behaving, right reason in action. In other words, conforming every action to right reason. So from that definition, you can see that prudence, in a sense, this is why prudence is referred to as like the king of all the virtues, the king, the charioteer of all the other virtues. If you were to think of all the virtues as horses, then prudence is the charioteer who's guiding those horses. So that's what he means by this point. The temperance which fulfills the conditions of perfect virtue is not without prudence, while this is lacking to all who are in sin. Hence, those who lack other virtues, through being subject to the opposite vices, have not the temperance which is a virtue, though they do acts of temperance from a certain natural disposition, insofar as certain imperfect virtues are either natural to man, as stated above in a previous question, or acquired by habituation, which virtues, through lack of prudence, are not perfected by reason, as stated above. This is an important point to understand, that a virtue is actually something that is perfected by reason. We spoke about it several episodes ago. We said a virtue is really it's actually an internal action. It's an internal action that may or may not find outward expression. And he's saying that sometimes you have people who have these outward expressions which point towards some kind of virtue, but that virtue is not really and truly and 100% what we are speaking about when we're speaking about virtues. It kind of looks like a virtue. It has some elements of a virtue, but it's not fully a virtue. And he says that this can be due to natural disposition, or it can be due to habituation. Like, you just do something over and over until you become good at it. For example, let's say the virtue of temperance insofar as food is concerned. Maybe you meet a person who never overeats, I know people who they're nibblers. Like, I visit them at their homes, have lunch with them, or go with them to barbecues, or go to a restaurant, and it doesn't matter how big or how small the plate is presented to them, they'll just nibble a little bit and say that they are full. And sometimes I look at them with envy. I'm like, whoa, I wish I could be like that, because I'm ravenous, and have to really make an effort to stop eating. But they're just nibblers, and it's almost like by natural inclination, they've got tiny stomachs, and they don't need that much food, and they don't look like flagpoles either. They're perfectly fine in terms of their physique and their health. Then you have other people who have gotten used to eating less. Maybe they eat food that keeps them fuller for longer. Maybe it's protein-rich food, or maybe they eat food that doesn't make them have a crash and make them feel hungry, so they avoid sugar-laden foods. And so through habit, they learn to eat less. However, this is not yet virtue because it is not yet perfected by reason. And I'll give you an anecdote just to end this episode, which explains this point more clearly. There's a story that's told of St. Francis of Assisi, and this is the 800th anniversary year since his death. There's a story told of St. Francis of Assisi. Now, St. Francis of Assisi founded the Franciscans, but the proper name is Order of Friars Minor. So if you ever see OFM after a priest's name, it means he's a Franciscan. Order of the Friars Minor. And so he got some brothers together, and they started this order of monks that go around preaching, and they said they wouldn't own anything and they'd beg for all the food that they got, etc. And so as a result, you can imagine fasting became it became part of their lives, like not only because of circumstances, but also just because of a decision of saying we're going to fast, and we're going to as all the members of the Franciscans are going to hold regular fasts. One time, they were doing a fast. All the brothers were together doing a fast. I don't know for how long this fast was, but it was a rigorous fast. And one of the brothers, someone who joined them recently, was really struggling with this fast, and he was maybe, I don't know if he was weak or maybe he was sick, but he was really struggling with this fast. But at the same time, he was battling with scruples in his conscience. Scruples is that thing where you become like super finicky in your conscience, and you have to tick all boxes, and following the rules is the most important thing. So for him, he was like, he'd sooner die than break the fast ahead of time, ahead of his other brothers. St. Francis of Assisi noticed this guy was really, really struggling, and they still had several hours of fasting to go. What did he do? He called all the brothers together, and he told them, guys, let's set the table. And they set the table, said, guys, let's put out a meal. And they put out a meal, and he led the way in eating. And he enjoyed his meal, and he laughed, and that just set everyone at ease. And the others started eating, and this brother of his, who was for fasting and trying to hold on to that fast, realized, hey, it's cool, let me eat. And he ate. And St. Francis afterwards explained to the brothers that even though the virtue of temperance is important, it has to be guided by prudence and brotherly love, fraternal charity. And that's what makes every virtue a proper virtue, not just a habit or a natural inclination.